Hello everybody. I'm going to make no apologies whatsoever for driving yet another Ferrari. Now the thing about Ferraris is they're a little bit like James Bond. You see, your favourite doesn't necessarily need to be the best. And I don't care if Sean Connery is your favourite Bond and you know that he fought a tank that was essentially two people wearing some cardboard and he had some very cheesy lines and he may have occasionally been extremely un-PC. If he's your favourite Bond, then so be it. And it's the same with Ferraris. Now, for many people, their favourite Ferrari may also be from a Bond film. That 355 versus DB5 chase with the beautiful Famke Janssen, very special. But for a whole generation of people, you mention Ferrari and it's always going to conjure up the image of Thomas Magnum. Now a lot of people will confuse the 308 and the 328, and I do believe Mr. Magnum drove a 308. For all intents and purposes, let's just forget the differences. This is the world famous Influenzo. If you haven't heard of the Influenzo, please go and check out the story of its birth and its purchase on my friend Jack's channel, number 27. You see, during lockdown here in the UK, he got a little bit bored and did the only sensible thing one can do to pass the time. He bought himself a dirt cheap Ferrari, unseen, at auction, with all of about 2 hours of preparation. And I have to say, I think he rather lucked out. This may be an imperfect car, and on an almost weekly basis it has caused him some form of grief. Now I know some people might call that traumatic bonding. He's had some more colourful words for the car, but there's absolutely no denying I think he's in love, and I can completely see why. I'll admit the 308 and 328 have never really been the Ferrari for me. I just didn't really understand them. When I was younger, my dad actually had a 328 when they weren't all that old, but at a time when you could pick up a 328 pretty cheaply. It cost less than the M3 that he had at the time. Now, because I was only about 5 or 6, I don't really remember the 328 that fondly. In fact, I didn't like it at all because it didn't have a radio. So as far as I was concerned, it was rubbish. As I grew older, the 308 and 328 were cars that I never really liked, until one very specific evening that I recall very well. I was on Chiswick High Street about 11 years ago, and there, just cruising through town, burbling away, was an absolutely stunning black 308. It looked so menacing, so purposeful, and at that moment I realised I did have a bit of a thing for the 308. Now they are an interesting car to drive. They are of course a world away from my own 550 and the 355 and other much more modern, by these standards, cars. This one is a 79 or 80 model. It's the very last of the carb cars. And to provide a little bit more of a soundtrack, we have popped the top off the airbox cover for you. So hopefully the camera that I've perched up top is getting some good sound. There was nowhere on the back of the car to easily put the camera for my usual exhaust shot, so I apologise if you feel like you're missing out on that. The controls are all reasonably heavy, including the gear shift, which actually moves through the gate very nicely, but doesn't click-clack like you might expect a Ferrari to. The steering is unassisted and pretty weighty too, as are the clutch, the brake and the throttle. This is very much a work in progress, and I've promised Jack that this isn't going to be a sort of full-bore review, and it's not going to be that, because that'll be very, very unfair. But this is really a true, proper classic car. I've driven quite a few different cars today, actually. One of the last I drove was a resto-modded 911, built out of an old 3.2 Carrera Sport. And I'm getting similar vibes in this, which is amazing considering that this is not a resto mod. This is an as original car. Now, I've just found out the hard and awfully sounding way that this car doesn't always appreciate a bit of rev matching, and that when you're driving around town and slowly, don't try and blip it from third to second, just move through slowly. It seems much happier doing that. Don't ask me why, that's just how it is. Interestingly, even from cold, second gear in this car isn't too bad. And most surprisingly, this is a really nice, supple ride. There is, of course, plenty of chassis flex here, but then there would be. This is a 40-year-old sports car with no roof on it. This was never, ever going to be the most rigid of platforms, so you can't really count that against it. What's amazing is just how on top of the road you feel. There's really very little car between you and the tarmac. It's a magical view out, and you can actually see quite a bit of bonnet, which you can't in the 348 and 355. There's just nothing there. Totally different experience, of course, to a front engine Ferrari where you've got an awful lot of real estate out ahead of you. The 308's also reasonably practical. You have a little boot at the front, not that there's much space in there, and one at the back, which is surprisingly generous. Now, that being said, this is not really a car for carrying any sort of dairy produce, because wherever you store it in the car, it's going to cook. Below about 30 miles an hour, the steering does get reasonably heavy, but above that, it's actually very easy to use, very nice, and you don't really miss the power steering. In fairness, that's exactly how I'd want a car like this to be. When Ferrari first started doing power steering, they didn't get it that right. It's also one less system to go wrong. I have to say, it's absolutely no surprise whatsoever that they had Tom Selleck going around Hawaii in a convertible one of these, because there is no way in hell that he'd fit in the coupe. In fact, you might have even noticed, but I'm struggling a little bit. The top edge of the camera view, that's pretty much the top edge of the car. I'm not that tall, I'm about 5'10", and I would struggle. It's amazing how well this car copes with the little speed bumps and things that are so common around this part of the world. I feel like it's going to grind out in every single one of them, but yet it hasn't tapped any of them. I also apologise for the fairly odd lighting scenario. We're filming this in the evening. We were supposed to do this tomorrow, but it looked like it was going to be a bit of a washout. Anyway, let's give you some Ferrari noises. $250 mighty Italian horses. They do all right. Personally, I think Jack's selling the car short. To me, this feels about right on power. The 911 I just came out of was 1,100 kilos and about 250 brake, and it felt pretty similar to this. And the steering is definitely a little imprecise. That may be down to just the age of some of the components. Also, those pretty generously sidewall tyres up front. But the ride is fantastic. You float down this road really nicely, and it makes the most wonderful sound. Now, you're all going to have to excuse me, but for safety's sake, the sunnies are going on. Oh, this is a perfect experience. The brakes do work, they're not the best, but the pedal feels pretty decent. And the view out is incredible. The thing that keeps surprising me is just how small this car is. I mean, it really doesn't feel much off an Elise or something like that in terms of its physical dimensions. It is certainly a little bit bigger, or maybe a lot bigger, but when you're in it, the car just melts away. The car can move around a little bit. It's such an interactive little thing, this. You don't need to be giving it hell for leather, and it's just an absolute joy to pedal. It really is. I think the sound's pretty nice too. Sure, it does sound perhaps a little bit more 4-cylinder than 8-cylinder. There's no wail out of it, and that is something I know that Jack is working on, but honestly, in terms of a first experience, first exposure to a classic mid-engine V8 Ferrari, I don't think I could ask for better. The weather is stunning. It's a beautiful temperature out there. The car's still pretty warm. We're getting gobs of hot air thrown over us all the time, and I don't care. Sure, the interior is a bit weird and crazy, and the switches are all very, very retro, but hey, it's a 40-year-old car. What do you expect? The big thing is that there's a prancing horse down here on the cute little horn. It's making mostly the right noises. It's an absolute joy, and right about now, there's nowhere else I'd rather be, and that is what you should always be able to say about a Ferrari. It's a special experience. This is a special car, and I must admit to a fraction of jealousy. Even the fact that this is a left-hand drive car, when it's so dainty, doesn't really detract from it whatsoever. So this is my first review, my first drive, my first experience in a Ferrari 308. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment below, subscribe if you haven't already, and please, 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 do go check out Jack's channel. It's well worth it. A lot more info on this car, the history, and his many adventures with it. See you for the next one. Oh yes. Bye bye.